Hello and welcome to the Musical Instrument Investigator. Today we are on the website of Brompton's auctioneers based in the UK. We're going to have a look at their latest instrument auction. So this is the general kind of auction, so kind of lower level stuff, but there's still some interesting things in here. There's quite a lot of items in this sale actually, and quite a few interesting things. 334 lots. Loads of bows, violas, cellos, violins, etc, etc, and a few other random things. So as I said before, this is based in the UK, so if you're outside of the UK, if you're in Europe or anywhere else in the world, then check for shipping prices, export, import, all of these fun things that you can find out all above here. The buyer's premium is 20%, but Brompton's has this thing where if you're the first person to place a bid, then you end up winning it, then you save 2% on the buyer's premium and it becomes 18%, which actually can be quite useful at times, I have to say, so it's definitely worth bearing that in mind. Obviously this auction is due to finish on the 13th of December and it's the 11th, so we can see here in bold that a few people have bid on things, but it's not crazy activity at the moment, so there's still an opportunity to do that, to place a bid on something and potentially be able to win it and then get a reduced buyer's premium. But anyway, that's enough of that rubbish. We have a lot of lots to go through, so let's see what we have. So we have an English silver mounted violin bow by John Dodd. 2,000 to 3,000 is the estimate on that. You can see the 20% buyer's premium. We've got a German silver mounted violin bow by Richard Violin. Estimates 300 to 400 on that. A German nickel mounted and engraved violin bow. No bids on that one so far. An English gold mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. The Ealing Strings shop no longer in existence. An interesting nickel mounted violin bow, possibly French. No bids on that one so far. A German silver mounted violin bow by Franz Winkler. No bids on that. A German nickel mounted violin bow by Karl Hofner. Nothing on that. An English silver mounted violin bow by W.E. Hills and Sons. Stick has serious damage repairs in top quarter. This has been covered up with dark varnish, so impossible to see extent of damage. Frog good, but with badly fitted thumb projection. So doesn't all sound that great, really, does it? So no bids on that. Unsurprising. Silver mounted Violin style violin bow. But at least there's information on the listings. An English silver mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings again. A 3/4 size German nickel mounted violin bow by Herbert Wanka. Perfect. A 3/4 French nickel mounted violin bow, probably by a member of the Bizarre family. French silver mounted violin bow, probably workshop of Dominique Picat. Going to say that's 3,000 to 4,000. That seems likely. An English silver mounted violin bow by W.E. Hills and Sons. 1,800 to 2,000. There's no bids on that one so far. German silver mounted violin bow by Matthias Thoma. No bids on that either. French silver mounted violin bow by Charles Nicolas Bazin. Got no bids on that. A German silver mounted violin bow by Heinz Dolling. No activity there. German nickel mounted bow, workshop of Ludwig Bausch. And on to the next one. A bundle of bows. So we can kind of mainly ignore that, but might be useful for someone. Nickel mounted violin bow, probably German. A good German silver mounted violin bow by H.R. Frechner. Silver mounted violin bow. A lot of things don't have any bids yet. A German silver mounted violin bow by Richard Violin. French silver mounted violin bow by Louis Bazin. An interesting silver mounted violin bow, possibly French. A French nickel mounted violin bow, School of Dominique Picat. Stick good but with some damage, 3 to 4 inches behind the head. Frog missing ferrule, pearl and petite tabra. Also missing some ebony around the underside. Slide even. Interesting. An English silver mounted split cane violin bow by Lawrence Cocker. Interesting. A German silver mounted violin bow by Ludwig Bausch. Nickel mounted violin bow by G. Rudi Steinel. A bundle of 4 violin bows. Bundle of 5 various bows. Bundle of 10 various bows. Bundle of 10 various bows again. Bundle of 8 various bows. An English violin circa 1865, 1000 to 1500 is the estimate there, stamped T-Bird. Lot 39, a violin, 600 to 1000 is the estimate, labelled Luigi Fabris. An Italian violin by Guido Alberini, Cremona, 1987. 4 to 5 is the estimate, no bids so far. An Italian violin by Cesare Topetti, Todi, 2006. No bids on that. German violin, circa 1920. No bids on that one. Ooh. A violin, possibly German, circa 1920. No bids on that. An interesting violin attributed to Giuseppe Fiorini, Munich, 1913. A violin, probably Mirko, circa 1920. An interesting 3/4 size violin. A violin by Vladimir Lutsev, Ukraine, 1982. Curious to see some violins from other countries. A violin, the famous nondescript Brompton's lots. A violin, possibly French. Not much more descriptive. A German violin, circa 1880. No bids on that. An Italian violin by Agostino de Planis, Genoa, 1757, 6 to 10,000, sold with a certificate of Florian Leonhard, 2021. Length of back 361. I mean, it's an interesting violin, but it's somewhat eccentric shape, so not sure how popular that's going to be. An interesting violin, probably by a member of the Hop family, circa 1800. This is kind of one of the better kind of Hop style violins that you see. 1500 to 2000 is the estimate. Seems a little high. These aren't usually too popular, but we shall see. A violin, circa 1930. Another violin there. A violin, second half of the 19th century. No bids on that so far. A violin, another nondescript, or 12 bids on that, so there's some interest to this. It's labelled Stefano Cogna in Cremona, so a 3/4 size violin, circa 1890. No bids on that one so far. A good Italian violin by Carlo Bruno Turin, 1904, after Guadagnini. This, I think, is one of the more interesting lots. Length of back is quite nice. I personally quite like the varnish, quite like the wood. I think it's an interesting looking violin personally, but no interest so far. A violin. Another violin. It's more standard there. A good violin attributed to and probably by Giovanni Longaru, New York, circa 1912. Interesting F-holes. Curious back. A violin, once again, with a certificate from Giuseppe Stefanini there. Another violin here. It's labelled Anselmus Belliosus, Venice. It's actually fairly interesting looking violin. It's got an interesting triangle button repair. Looks like a soundpost crack in the back. Yep, with no patch and worm damage, so it's kind of everything that you probably wouldn't want in an instrument, but it is actually fairly curious otherwise, but not sure how well that will sell. A violin attributed to Giuseppe Pedrozzini, Milan 1950. It's got 2 bids. It's got a certificate from Franco Forcellini, Mantua. Good violin, probably French. A French violin, workshop of Thimbeville Lamy, circa 1910. An Italian violin by Emanuele Cortoni, Pistoia, 2021. Got a couple of bids there. It's an interesting varnish. A French violin, circa 1900. An Italian violin by Angelo Bontempi, Venice, 1971. 2,600 is the starting bid. I think this is a fairly interesting instrument. 356, kind of respectable back length, so it's not too bad, but not popular so far. An interesting violin attributed to Angelo Molia, Genoa, circa 1750. So interesting F-holes in shape. So sold with a certificate from John Dilworth. Let's see what he says. The violin shown in the photographs attached over the leaf is, in my opinion, the work of Angelo Molia, made in Genoa, circa 1750. So no bids on that, starting at 9,000. A good violin attributed to Lorenzo Bellafontana, Genoa, 1947. A German violin, probably by Johann Gottlob Ficker, Marknenkirchen, circa 1780. We've got 1 bid on that. A violin ascribed to Carlo Carletti, 359 is the back. No bids on that so far. A violin, and a violin attributed to Dario Diatilli, New York, 1961, after Bergonzi. 6 to 10 is the estimate. It's an interesting varnish going on here. Quite arty. Obviously, Dario Diatilli was quite a well-known kind of expert at the time in instruments. A good and interesting violin. It's popular. 5 bids on that. It's not hit the low end of the estimate yet. A good violin attributed to and possibly workshop of Paul Knorr, Marknenkirchen, 1926. 22 bids on that. It's interesting. It's popular. A violin attributed to Eugene Meinl, Marknenkirchen, 1925. Interesting, 26 bids on that. So there's a lot of the German ones are kind of getting popular. They're 2,800, yeah, way over the estimate already. A French violin by Amédée Dudouin, Mirecourt, 1955. A couple of bids on this one. An English violin by Charles Tweedale from Weston, 1919. There's no bids on that one so far. A good violin, circa 1830. Starting bid 1,500. There's no bids on that one so far. An Italian violin by Giancarlo Serreri, Chiavari, 1984. No bids on that, starting at 1,000. Good half-size German violin, workshop of Neuner and Hornstein and Mittenvald, 1895. 2 bids on that one. A lot of love for the German instruments in this auction. A Spanish violin by Ramon Paramon, Barcelona, 1948. Don't often see Spanish instruments so much. Starting bid is 9,000 on that. An interesting composite violin, possibly Dutch. So this is slightly curious instrument. Not so keen on the back there, but parts of it quite interesting, but no one is bidding on that so far. An interesting violin, possibly France or Low Countries, 19th century. No bids on that. It's another one that's kind of fairly curious looking violin. Interesting back. Very long though, length of back 366. That's an incredibly long instrument. It's going to be interesting. Good German violin, workshop of Ernst Heinrich Roth, Mark Kirkin. 5 to 800 is the estimate. 2 bids. An Italian violin by Raphael Callis, Naples 1895. There's no bids on this so far. A violin, 2 bids on this. That seems to have quite a nice back. A German violin, circa 1870. No bids on it so far. Quite a nice line, better than the normal kind of tradey stuff we get. French violin, workshop of JTL, Miracle, circa 1900. And a good and interesting violin, probably second half of the 18th century. Length of back 359. There's 1 bid on this. It's a nice, quite a nice looking scroll. It's definitely an interesting instrument there. Repairs to ribs, back and peg box, sound post crack in table with patch, so not too surprising there. 4 violins, a German violin after Maggini, a violin possibly German, a violin possibly schooled of Calsin, a German violin circa 1950. So our job lot there. This one's fairly kind of interesting, but no bids on that so far. 2 violins, a French violin, probably Miracle 1924, made for Hawks and Son, London, a half-size French violin, workshop of JTL, Miracle circa 1890. So that's got 1 bid on. A violin, possibly English, second half of the 19th century. Starting bid is 150. This I don't think is too bad. I think it's kind of fairly interesting. Length of back is a little bit on the long side. Repairs to table and ribs, but 150 could be interesting. German violin by E.H. Schmidt, Mark Kirkin, first half of the 20th century, estimates 1,000 to 1,500. There's no bids on that yet. An English violin by John Mather, Harrogate, 2009, so more recent violin there. English violin, 357 is the length of back. Starting bid 350, there's no bids so far. An English violin by Thomas Urquhart, London, circa 1680. Now this is definitely interesting because this is one of the earlier English makers, so it's kind of good to see this come up for auction. There's 1 bid of 3.5 already, so that's kind of good to see. There's some love for the older English instruments. Length of back 357. Repairs to table, ribs, peg box, sound post crack and table, that's all pretty normal. And certificate of Hieronymus Kostler, Stuttgart 2020. So that's an interesting violin. That's definitely, I'm quite interested in these early English violins, so that's a good one. A French violin, Miracle 1886, made for Riviera and Hawks, London. A 3/4 violin, probably Miracle circa 1910, made for Hawks and Son, London. And a French violin, probably by Guillaume Malin, Miracle 1820. It's an interesting back. 1 bid on that for 2,000. And an interesting composite violin, second half of the 17th century and later. So there you go. Quite curious. Chance to possibly own something that's at least partially from the 17th century. Be interesting to know what parts are composite. Interesting button repair there. So definitely curious. Sound post cracking table, which looks like it hasn't been repaired, but nevertheless curious. An English violin by John Lamb, Shiremore 1891. Quite a pretty back on that. No bids so far though. A violin with the Steiner label. An Italian violin, possibly by Nicola Utili, Emilia Romagna, circa 1910. There's no bids on this. It's quite a dark red varnish on that. It's usually kind of associate that with English instruments, but definitely curious, but no bids on that so far. Violin, probably English, circa 1899. No bids on this one either. An Italian violin by Bruno Donna, Treponti, 2019. No bids on this. So repair to table, I think we can see it's kind of there. A violin, probably by Giuseppe Bossi, Stradella, 1929. There's no bids on this. It's a bit of an interesting work, and F holes on that. Slightly curious. Two violins, a French violin workshop of JTL, and a German violin circa 1920. No bids so far. Two violins, a French violin workshop of JTL, and a German violin circa 1920. So a good French violin, School of Calçat, circa 1870. Missing neck and peg box. Well, 22 bids on that. It's at 280. So, but it still hasn't reached the reserve yet. A violin attributed to Genuzio Carletti, Bologna, 1960. 3 bids on that. Okay. A violin attributed to Annibale Zuffa, Solarolo, second half of the 20th century. No bids on that so far. It certainly looks curious. A quarter-size French violin, Miracle, 1910. A French violin workshop of JTL, Miracle, circa 1890. A violin attributed to Mario Garda, Mantua, 1978, with a certificate from Mario Garda. 4 bids on that. A French violin workshop of JTL, Miracle, circa 1910. 2 violins, a German violin, first half of 20th century, 3/4 size German violin, circa 1900, after Maggini. No bids on that so far. 2 violins, a violin possibly Miracle, 1920, and a half-size French violin workshop of JTL from about 1890. Could be an interesting French half size actually. A Baroque violin, probably German, second half of the 18th century. 4 to 6 is the estimate. No takers so far. Labelled Gennaro Galliano, 356 length the back. It's an interesting looking thing because it looks a lot more modern than 18th century to me, but you know, I've got to trust the experts. A Swedish violin by Jens Burkholm, Malmo, 2004. A kind of contemporary Swedish luthier. 3 violins with not much information here, so they've given up on these ones. You've got the length of backs only, 358, 360 and 360. 3 violins, 3/4 size German, French violin JTL, and an English violin by W.V. Whitburn, Birmingham, 1999. So there's a couple of bids on that, so maybe potentially people want the English violin, or maybe not even. Okay. A violin circa 1900, made for Thomas Craig of Aberdeen. 260 is the current bid. A good violin. No bids on that so far. French violin, probably Paris, circa 1890. Interesting back on that. No bids on that one. It's quite long. French silver mounted viola bow by Roger and Max Millant. No bids on that so far. It's a kind of fairly high-end-ish kind of thing. An English silver mounted viola bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. So someone's getting rid of a whole load of Michael Taylor bows. A German silver mounted violin or viola bow by August Edwin Prager. And a German silver mounted violin or viola bow, it's one of those ones in the middle. A good English viola by Samuel Blakely Wilkinson, Leeds 1890. 3 bids on that, so that's popular. It looks to be quite nice actually. A nice looking instrument. An interesting viola attributed to and possibly by Louis Galliard, Mircore, circa 1850. There's no bids on that. It looks a little bit plain to me, not sure about that one. A contemporary Italian viola by Danielle Ranieri, Rome 2019, with a leather bound folio certificate of the maker. No bids on that so far. Okay. And a French viola, probably Paris, first half of the 18th century. No bids on that. It's quite an interesting shape to that one. Nice, nice scroll actually. Yep, that's kind of an interesting one. An English viola by Charles and Samuel Thompson, London 1786. 5 to 8 is the estimate. 4,000 is the starting bid. It's a nice looking instrument, but nothing so far. Seems in pretty good condition. You see the brand at the back there, so that's quite cool. Good viola attributed to Michelangelo Castelli, 1909. A German viola by Karl Hofner, Bourbon-Ruth, 1991. 1 bid on that. An Italian viola by Cesare Topetti, Todi, 2000. Repairs to scroll. No bids on that. A viola. No bids on a viola. Ooh. A good German viola, circa 1865. Slightly curious. 2 bids on that. That's got some popularity. An Italian viola by Lorenzo Facino Guardo, Cremona, 1970. 2 bids on this. It's in very good condition, yeah, I was going to say. It's in very good condition. An interesting viola, probably English, circa 1800. No bids on that. Yeah, this is quite an interesting viola actually, with the double purfling and the kind of geometric style patterns at the back. Yeah, it's very cool. I think a starting bid of 1,000. I think that's not too bad actually. Unlabelled. Some post-cracking table though, so that's a little unfortunate. English viola by C.D. Greener, Newcastle, 1982. So kind of quite wide body. No bids on that so far. A good German viola, circa 1870. There's 4 bids on that. Currently on 1900. We're in mid estimate territory there. An Italian viola by Alfredo Gianotti, Milan, 1974. No bids on that. Looking at 6 to 10 is the estimate. Nice, nice wood on the back. And an English viola by Frederick Daniel Mahoney, London, 1937. Quite like this quite pale varnish. No bids on that so far. A viola, probably German, circa 1880. No information on that. French viola, Mircore, circa 1870. No bids so far. English viola by Paul Voigt, London, 1955. Another quite wide viola. No bids so far. Good viola attributed to Giuseppe Pellicani, Modena, 1968. There's no bids on that so far. Got some repairs to the ribs. An English viola by Brian Philip Brealey, Nottingham, 1994. Okay. A French nickel-mounted cello bow by Charles Nicolas Bazar, with the Raffin certificate, as we expect to see. Good French cello bow stick there, one bid of that on at £800. A German nickel-mounted cello bow by Arnold Voigt. A German cello bow, possibly by a member of the Knott family. An interesting cello bow, possibly by a member of the Dodd family. An interesting silver-mounted cello bow, possibly French. Let's see. Got a bit of a nasty head repair there, so hence a low estimate. An interesting cello bow, probably English, circa 1800. That's a curious one. 2,600 is the starting bid, and no takers so far. An English silver-mounted cello bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. There you go. Let's have more Michael Taylor things. A German nickel-mounted cello bow by Roderick Paysold. A bundle of 6 cello bows. A silver-mounted French-style double bass bow, probably by Louis Morizot. No bids on that. An interesting nickel-mounted French-style double bass bow, possibly French. A German nickel-mounted French-style double bass bow by Konrad Gotz. A good and interesting cello with a Derazzi label, no bids on that. A cello, 2 bids on that one. An interesting cello, English or German, probably first half of the 19th century. So slightly curious. Interesting scroll, 9 bids on that, it's up to £1,100. That will probably go quite well, I think. Cello probably French, circa 1890. 1 bid on that. A cello probably German, circa 1900. A good and interesting cello, circa 1800. Definitely a curious one there. 1 bid there on 3.5. It's an interesting looking instrument. A German cello, Mittenvald, circa 1910. No bids on that. A German cello, first half of the 19th century. No bids on that one either. A German cello, probably Mittenvald, circa 1890. No bids on that. It's quite a lot of information here. Repairs to table and ribs, soundpost cracking table. There's a line in the region of the soundpost area on the back of the cello, but this appears to be a grain or varnish anomaly, and there does not appear to be evidence of a crack internally. While we are confident that the marking is superficial, we invite prospective buyers to satisfy themselves that no structural damage is present prior to bidding. That's interesting. Not seen quite that level of disclaimer before, but it's curious. An Italian quinton by Giorgio Corsini, Rome, 1956. Interesting little thing. A German viol, workshop of Peter Harlan, Kassel, 1932. An interesting viol or violoncello di Spalla, probably German, first half of the 19th century. 2 bids on that on 300. It's definitely a curious looking instrument for sure. A German double bass, circa 1910. A book at Stradivari. Another book, Dmitri Gindin, about late Cremonese makers. A single bow case, workshop of Hill and Sons, 1 bid on that, 50. An English oblong violin case by Michael Gorge, 5 bids on that. They're always popular, the Gorge cases. An oblong viola case by BAM, 1 bid on that. An oblong violin case by Gewa, Venezia model. An English oblong case by Michael Gorge, no bids on that one. An oblong double violin case. An oblong double violin case there. A flute by Fernand Chapelin. That's interesting. A flute by Ruddle Cart and Co. Limited. A modern troubadour harp. Modern Celtic harp. A good Spanish guitar, circa 1850. No bids on that so far. Looks fairly standard. An interesting violin bow, possibly circle of Francois Javier Tort. Number of bids 0 so far. Stick with significant repair, new wood to head, handle with much wear, the later German frog with cheval. So, interesting. A French nickel-mounted violin bow by Francois Lot, 2 bids on that. A German nickel-mounted violin bow by Adolf Thoma. A German nickel-mounted violin bow. A nickel-mounted violin bow, probably by a member of the Knott family. No bids on that. A German nickel-mounted violin bow by H.R. Frechner. A contemporary Baroque violin bow by Ken Cameron. No bids on that so far. A German nickel-mounted violin bow. A modern nickel-mounted violin bow. A good nickel-mounted violin bow, probably German. An English ebony mounted violin bow, School of Dodd. This is fairly interesting. Very good throughout. I was going to say this looks in very good condition, so that's quite curious. Silver mounted violin bow, probably German. A German nickel mounted violin bow. A nickel mounted violin bow by possibly by August Husson. A German gold mounted violin bow, probably not workshop after taught. A nickel mounted violin bow, probably German. A German silver mounted violin bow by a member of the Penzel family. A German nickel mounted violin bow, probably by Otto Derschmidt. A nickel mounted violin bow. A French nickel mounted violin bow by Nicolas Malines. No bids on that so far. Certificate of Gilles Chancerole. A French silver mounted violin bow. A good silver mounted violin bow, probably German. A French nickel mounted violin bow by Louis Morison Père. A German nickel mounted violin bow after Guillaume. A good silver mounted violin bow, probably French. An interesting German ivory mounted violin bow, 3 bids on that one. A good nickel mounted violin bow, probably workshop of JTL. No bids on that so far. A bundle of 20 bows. 10 bows. 8 various bows. An interesting violin, possibly by Pietro Novelli, Venice, circa 1790. 2 bids on that. It's an interesting looking thing. The back is very, very nice. Repairs to pegbox. I mean, it's in incredible condition. If it is circa 1790, it's a curious one. French violin, workshop of Colin Mazar-Fiel, Paris 1941. 1 bid on that. A French violin, workshop of Colin Mazar-Fiel, Paris 1928. 1 bid on that. German violin, workshop of Neuner and Hornsteiner, Mittenvald, 1869. 2 violins, a German violin, circa 1910, and 1 circa 1920. A violin attributed to Amédée Dodone, Paris, 1922. 3 violins, a French violin, workshop of JTL, Mirko. A good half-size German violin, and another violin, probably German. So another collection again. 2 violins, a German violin circa 1900 and a 3/4 size violin. 1 bid on that. French violin, probably by Émile Laurent, Paris 1927. So 1 bid on that one. Violin attributed to Paul Bailey, Paris 1902. An interesting violin. No bids on the interesting violin. A German violin, circa 1900. A violin, probably Naples, circa 1900. No bids on that one. It's slightly curious, purfling. A violin, first half of the 19th century. No bids on that. A violin, circa 1830. A very interesting violin, probably Italian, first half of the 19th century, with a Presender label. Starting bid is 13,000. There's no bid so far. An Italian violin by Luigi Mazzani, Cento, 1917. Starting bids of 6,000 on that one. An Italian violin by Bruno Donna, Treponti, 1985. No bids on that. Certificate of the maker. It's got a fairly interesting back there. 1800 is the start. An interesting violin. No bids on that. Two violins, 7/8 German and another German violin. One bid on that. 260. An English violin by J.D. Nicholson, Bebington, 1994. An Italian violin, Circle of Revolta, first half of the 19th century, 0 bids on that. Certificate of Florian Leonhardt, 2021. It's had quite a lot of repairs. A violin, probably Tyrol, circa 1780. It's got 4 bids on that. It's 3-2 is the current bid. Signpost crack in table, but with patch. It's definitely a fairly interesting instrument. A French violin, possibly by Francois Breton, at Mirecourt, circa 1830. A violin by Evan Devereux, Rees, New Zealand, 1910. I think it's quite possibly the first violin from New Zealand that I've seen up for auction sale, but it looks quite nice. Quite long though, 363. A German violin, circa 1780. One bid on that for 1800. It's got an interesting head, not the prettiest, but it looks fairly interesting. Looks like the head's been placed inside that. Yep. An interesting violin, English or German, circa 1780. Certainly a bit curious. One bid on that, 500. An English violin by A.J. Rope, Woolwich, 1908. No bids on that so far. Looks kind of interesting enough. A French violin made for Hawks and Son, circa 1920. Good French violin, Mirecourt, 1890. 13 bids on that, it's popular. Violin, possibly Italian, circa 1980. 3 bids on that, 500. It's got a fairly interesting varnish on it. An English violin by Joseph Allwood, London, circa 1719. No bids on that. I think that's a nice colour to it as well. I do quite like these yellowish English instruments. German violin, circa 1880. There's 1 bid on that, 200. Some people like these things. A German violin by David Hopf, Klingenthal, circa 1780. There's 1 bid on that for 1500. It's quite interesting. So it's a curious one. A German violin, circa 1900. It's one of these kind of standard trade ones. A German violin, circa 1930. An Italian violin by Giampiero Farina, Cecchino, 2003, 13 even. Certificate of the maker. It's got 2 bids on it already. German violin by George Walter Gutter, Mark Nikirkin, circa 1960, 3 bids on that. 1800, good showing for the German violins. French violin, workshop of Leon Bernardel, Paris, circa 1920. There's no bids on that so far. French violin, workshop of Louis Courtier, Miracle, 1934, 2 bids on that. French violin, probably first half of the 19th century. It's an interesting shape, 1 bid on that of 800. Violin attributed to and probably by R. Barthélemy Allium Bleville, 1925. No bids on that so far. Interesting varnish on that. A violin, probably English, first half of the 19th century. No bids on this so far. Interesting piece of wood in the back there. No bids. An Italian violin attributed to Felix Mori Costa, Parma, circa 1800. It's an interesting looking violin for sure. Interesting choice of wood for the back. Starting bid 7,000, no bids so far. An English violin attributed to Thomas Urquhart, London, second half of the 17th century. 3 bids on that. So attributed to, but no confirmation. Interesting corners on that. Definitely an interesting looking violin. Definitely had a bit of a tough life. Interesting scroll. So repairs to table ribs, back, neck and peg box, soundpost cracking table with patch, soundpost in cracking back with patch, but still 3 bids of 1,000, so people are obviously interested in that one as well. German violin circa 1900, 4 bids on that. Good violin, probably French, circa 1870. Good German violin, circa 1870. Slightly curious wood choice. It's a little bit all over the place. An interesting violin, second half of the 19th century. 2 bids on that, up to 2080. Definitely an interesting varnish there. A good violin, probably Miracle, circa 1900. It's got 3 bids. A violin, possibly workshop of Hugues Emile Blondelet, circa 1920. It's got a bid on that. An Italian violin, workshop of Felix Rotaru, Cremona, circa 2008. No bids on that. Starting bid of 1,300. A good violin, possibly schooled of Grandjean. 1 bid of 600 on that one. A good 7/8 German violin by C.F. Schuster, Cologne, circa 1900. 2 bids on that. It's got quite a nice back. A French violin by Paul Lorange, Marseille, 1934. 10 bids on that. A German Baroque violin by Matthias Johannes Kolditz, Munich, 1741. 3.5 is a starting bid. No bids so far. Quite a nice scroll. So there you go. An interesting violin, first half of the 20th century. A violin, probably workshop of Neumann Hornstein in Mittenvald, circa 1900. 1 bid on that. A French violin, Miracle, circa 1830. It's quite a striking back on that. Good length of back as well, so I'm surprised there's no bids on that. A German violin attributed to and possibly by Sympathus Nigel Fussen, circa 1760. No bids on this one. A German violin, Dresden, circa 1920, 2 bids on that. An interesting violin, second half of the 18th century, no bids on this so far. 355 back. An English violin by Robert Ward, Liverpool, 1931. No bids on this. Quite nice decoration there at the back. It's quite good. A German violin, Mark Nikirkin, circa 1910. So a dark varnish there. A very fine German violin by Sebastian, Klotz, Mittenvald, 1771. No bids so far. 12,000 is the start bid. 14 to 18,000 the estimate. These are creeping up in value. The violin has been in the possession of the same French family since 1780. Well, that's pretty mad. And the sale includes a letter from the current owners detailing the violin's history. Well, that's pretty interesting. A German violin, circa 1760. That's quite interesting. No bids on that one. Once again, quite a good length of back there. German violin, circa 1800. That is a cool scroll. It's had a lot of work, isn't it? Definitely curious. Labelled Alessandro Giuliani, Cremona 1663, length back 357. Starting bid 450. There's no bids on it so far, but it's a curious one. An American violin by Poland and Fuchs, Brooklyn, 1926. No bids on it so far. 260 is the start. A violin, second half of the 20th century. One bid of that. Good half-size Italian violin by Marcello Villa, Cremona, 1985. 16 bids on that. Wow, that's popular. It's gone up to 2,600, so that's way over the estimate. So either a very regarded maker or someone really wants a decent half-size violin. Good violin, first half of the 19th century after Maggini. 2 bids on that, 1,600. Even with the long back, it's still popular. German violin, Mittenvald, first half of the 19th century. 2 bids on that, 750 is the current bid. A German violin. No bids of that. A violin by Dante Baldoni, Buenos Aires, from 1935. It's got 2 bids up to 2,600, so that's doing okay. An interesting violin, possibly Italian, circa 1860. 1 bid there of 1,500. A violin with a hot stamp at the back, 1 bid of £50. Another A violin. Later Neapolitan scroll, 1 bid of £500 on that. Definitely looks quite interesting. A good German violin by Ernst Heinrich Roth, Mark Nikirkin, 1925. 2 bids on that, up to 3,800. An English violin by Nigel Melfi, Newark, 2006. 1,300 is the starting bid. An English violin, workshop of James Longman, London, circa 1770. No bids on that so far. 900 is the starting bid. Okay. An English violin by Paul Voigt, Manchester, 1921. 4 bids on that. We're up to £320. Really quite a nice back on that. A violin again. 1 bid of that for £50. Why not? A violin. 1 bid of that for £40. This is fairly interesting from the front. It's one of these conservatory type things. French Violin Workshop of Colin Mazar, circa 1900. There's a nice back on that, 10 bids, not too surprising. English Violin by Brian Philip Brearley, Nottingham in 1987, no bids on this so far. A violin by Giacomo Monbelli, Buenos Aires 1937, 2 bids on that, up to 550. A violin, possibly Italian, first half of the 19th century, no bids on that, 2.5 is starting. It's an interesting back to it. A good and interesting French violin, circa 1880. Not good enough to have any bids on it as yet, but still time to go. A French violin made for Beer and Sons London, Chateau Thierry, 1886 there. A German violin, Mark Nickerkin, circa 1920, no bids on that. An 8-size French violin, probably Miracle, 1900, 3 bids on that, it's up to £400. A good English violin by George Crusk, Manchester, circa 1840, good old George Crusk. This one seems like a fairly okayish one. It's one of the ones that sold by Hills, 5,000 starting bid, no bid so far. An interesting French violin, probably first half of the 19th century, length of back 361. Yeah, this is a curious looking instrument, curious scroll, curious F holes. It's all a bit curious. 1,000 starting bid, no bids so far. German violin, circa 1890. There's no bids on that. It's got a fake Perry stamp on the back. Definitely not a Perry. German violin, Dresden, circa 1920. No bids on that. Violin, probably German, first half of the 19th century. No bids on that one. A violin, probably German, circa 1890. There's 1 bid on that. A 3/4 size French violin, workshop of JTL, Miracle, 1900. No bids on that so far. German violin, 1886. Interesting wood at the back. Getting towards the end now, I think. German violin by the Wolf Brothers, Kreuznacht, 1888. 3 bids on that for 120. A German violin, workshop of E.H. Schmidt, Saxony, 1910. Got no bids on that. A 3/4 size French violin, workshop of JTL, circa 1900. A 7/8 French violin, probably Miracle, circa 1910. German violin, circa 1890. No bids on that. An Italian violin by Massimo Negroni, Cremona, 2021. 2 bids, 4,800 are up to so far. So then I think we're on the last one. A violin. Why not finish off with the classic A violin? Brompton's classic. No bids on that so far. So yeah, that has been the Brompton's auction. Quite a long one for Brompton's, actually, I have to say, but also quite an interesting one. Some very interesting instruments of all types of French, German, English, Italian. Really interesting things, and curious that the German instruments are doing really well on this auction, actually. So yeah, very interesting one to look at. So I'm going to put a link in the description as always, and check it out. This finishes on the 13th. It's the 11th today, so you still got a couple of bit of time to put some bids in and get your 2% discount on the items that haven't already got bids on. Buyer's premium discount. So yeah, check it out. Look at the link in description and see what you think. So once again, thanks for watching, and catch you next time. Ciao. Many thanks for tuning in to the Musical Instrument Investigator. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please like, subscribe and turn on notifications, and watch out for the next video coming soon.